Hello, my name is Patrick Usher, and in this video I wish to continue to discuss my personal experience with POTS from early 2015. As I always emphasise, I had it, I believe, for a year and a half before that in milder forms, but I'm really focusing in on the time when, as they might say, the shit hit the fan. So in the first video I talked about my week in Fuerteventura in mid to late February of 2015, my week from hell. And then I in my last video I talked about the 6 or 7 weeks that I was back in Dublin with my mum in palliative care and eventually her passing away, and how everything really was sort of a conglomeration of a very, very difficult and hard time, right? So in this video I'm now talking about after my mum had passed away, so that was April the 6th, 2015, and I'm leading up now to when I ordered the DNRS program, the Dynamic Neural Retraining System, which I started on May the 11th, 2015. But I'm just going to talk about the period in between. And I just want to just preface this by saying, I am so lucky that I ordered the DNRS program. And I took that leap of faith and I decided to do it. Because this all could have gone on a hell of a lot longer, and it was hard enough. So where were we at? So I kind of, although I had been doing a lot of research on POTS, that I kind of identified that I probably had it thanks to a heart rate and blood pressure monitor, which was showing heart rate scores, 130, 140, things like that, and consistently increasing by 30 or more beats from supine to standing. That I was pretty clear on that, but I had kind of postponed, apart from an earlier visit to a doctor, I postponed doing very much about it because there was the situation with my mum, and I was just trying to rest, see her get better, and I was also waiting for and already grieving the inevitable, which was her passing. Okay, so after she passed away, obviously I was in deep grief for many months. But I had made a promise that I was going to do all in my power to get better. It was a promise I made to her, and that some part of me, although I was grieving and always gave myself space to grieve, was also just intent to kind of get on with it and try to really explore how I could get better and to really start to act on that. So I really went about this. Now, the first thing to say is that I went back to my GP, my MD, as I said, a very, very lovely man, and not at all an invalidating doctor, but one who really wants to understand his patients. Always appreciated his approach. And I presented to him the idea that maybe I had this thing called POTS, and he hadn't heard of it, or maybe he kind of half had, but he didn't know much about it. And in advance of our consultation, he very kindly read up about it online, and he did a kind of little test in his office with the supine to standing thing, which showed an increase of plus 30. So he was like, oh, maybe you do. Well, fair play to you for working that out. Well done for diagnosing yourself. So what do we do now? And I said, well, there's a consultant in Dublin, one it seems, who sees POTS patients. So can I have a referral to her? So he gave me the referral. So I then rang up that consultant's office and made an appointment. And the earliest appointment I could get was for late June. Okay, so this was early April. All right. So that was that. So I had that in the bag, as it were, to look forward to, and I. So that was kind of the standard, that would lead to sort of standard medical care, as it were. Now, in Ireland, all you have to do is go to a consultant and sneeze at them, and they charge you €250 or $300. So, just mentioning that as an aside, okay? I mean, there is also there's an insurance system which isn't at all as expensive as America. It's fairly reasonable, but even with the insurance, you still sneeze at them and they charge you that, and then you get back a little bit of that. And there's also the free system, but that takes years, So anyway, that was situation. Was the earliest I could get was 3 months, and So I didn't want to kind of hang around. I wanted to get data, as much data. I'm this kind of very proactive person. I like to, if there's a problem, I like the solution. Sometimes I want the solution too quickly. That's a kind of fault. But I'm very much problem, solution kind of mentality. So I wanted to have as much data as possible before going to this consultant, right? So I organized privately a tilt table test, because I wanted to have this data in advance. I didn't want to have to wait another 3 months or whatever. Once you go and see the consultant and they say, well, yeah, you may have POTS, and so here's this test, and we'll do that in September. So I wanted to I went, paid for it myself, and I got the test done, and that was sort of mid-April, and I was feeling like somewhat better at this point. From the kind of disastrous points of February and early March and mid-March, I'd started to feel somewhat better. Still, so I was kind of more stable, and I started to go for kind of longer walks, which I'll talk about in a moment. Okay. So I went and got the tilt table test, and I made clear, in my application for it or whatever, that I wanted to be tested for POTS. Thank you very much. And I got there. I think it was the 14th of April, 2015, and I got there early in the morning, feeling desperate because it was quite a trek to get to this part of Dublin, and wasn't feeling very well at all. And so I got there. By the way, I travelled on my own, right, to get there. I wasn't taken there by the person who should have. Anyway, so I got there, and I was feeling weak and disoriented, and I was taken through for the tilt table. And I was strapped to this machine, and in this sort of darkened room. And I remember the guy who was giving me the test, and I said to him, so we're interested in that plus 30 beats per minute criterion. And he looked at me blankly. And I was like, you're testing me for POTS, right? And he was like, for what? And I was like, for POTS. And he's like, no, this is a standard tilt table test. It's for orthostatic hypotension. And does your blood pressure drop when you go upright? And I was like, no, I need it for POTS. And he's like, sorry, I don't know what that is. And I was like, okay, great, well, get on with it, I suppose. And then one of the nurses in the room said, I've heard of POTS. And I thought, oh great, she's heard of POTS, fantastic. And then she said, I think my daughter has it. And I said, oh. And she said, yeah, I just tell her to stop complaining and to just grow out of it. And I felt like hitting her, but I couldn't because I was strapped to the table, right? So there I was, strapped to the table, with this fella here who hadn't heard of what he was supposed to be testing me for, and he then he said, God, I didn't like this person at all. He said, I really enjoy this job. I mean, you never know what's going to happen. Like one time, someone died on the tilt table test briefly for a minute. Their heart stopped, and I had to bring them back to life. And I was thinking, great, that's just what you want to hear before you start a tilt table test. Have they tested you for psychopathy? Anyway, I didn't say that, obviously, but, the things you could say in life, but do not. So then I had the test, and it was a horrible experience because, as anyone who's had the tilt table will know, because you're strapped to the table, all of your normal muscles, which work a little bit when you stand, which help with pumping blood back up to the brain, a little bit of muscle work, are inactive because you're just strapped and you're kind of in a gravityless sort of zone almost. You're just, your body's not working in any way to keep you upright. It's purely internal. Your muscles aren't having to work because you're not standing. You're off the ground. Okay, and that's not a very nice feeling in and of itself. And the second thing that wasn't very nice is that at some point they gave me something. I don't know what it was, underneath my tongue to, can't remember, but it was something that, it was a vasodilator, so it opened up my blood vessels further to test again if I would faint. And so I hate thinking of this stuff. Anyway, so that made my heart rate go up even more. I think it was like 170 or 160 or something. And anyway, so eventually that was over with, and I said thank you very much, and left. And I remember them saying, you need to hang around just in case anything goes wrong, have a cup of tea. And I was like, okay. And then I just left because I really was quite annoyed that it hadn't been a tilt table test. There was proper, that was going to help me. It was a considerable sum of money. I had requests for POTS test, clearly, and no one had said we don't know what that is. So that was useless, basically. And so that was no help. And I got home and continued on. So the next point to make is that I was, researching a lot to try and work out what was causing POTS, why it was happening. I read a lot of papers, and I saw that fantastic, I don't know if you've watched it, but that fantastic 1 hour almost talk on YouTube by Professor Kari Burtsinski, which has about 50,000 views on POTS, which summarizes everything, and it's superb. Was very influential on me. But I was trying to study a lot. I was trying to work out how best to cope. I was formulating early ideas. But I was, kind of at that point, I was willing to believe the idea that I was deconditioned primarily because, I wasn't one to take too much exercise, but walk a fair bit, and I was certainly someone who would often get to 10,000 steps a day, but for some reason I was willing to accept that somehow I was deconditioned. So I was interested in the Levine protocol from Texas, which is that reconditioning program for POTS patients where they start supine on recumbent bikes and things like that, and they build up over some months to better cardiovascular fitness and seem to improve outcomes in people. So I was very interested in that. I corresponded with Professor Levine, in fact, and he was very nice and sent me some papers. And I was thinking that this must be the answer. Exercise is the answer, I thought. So I've not tried this before, and I'll try exercise now. What a great idea. So I thought that was going to be the main thing, and then I was also very interested in the role of diet. So I was aware of net protein deficiency, and I thought maybe diet would help heal that up. So I was investigating the WAHLS protocol diet, WAHLS, which is a diet that has had noticeable success with MS patients in rebuilding the levels of myelin in the brain, which is the structure that disintegrates in MS. That great talk by Terry Walls on YouTube called Minding My Mitochondria, well worth watching on that topic. So I was thinking, okay, these two are going to be my first protocol, and I was aware of the dynamic neural retraining system in the background, and I did order it in mid-April because I saw on their website 2 testimonials of POTS recovery, that of Lauren Dinkel of wheelchair to rollerblades.com fame, and Francis from Australia. So I saw both of those. I didn't really believe it, but I ordered the program because you do that kind of thing, right? You look around, you see where some people might be getting better, and you decide that you'll give it a go. So I ordered that, not expecting it to be anything special. I'll talk more about that in a future video, or maybe in some ways later in this video. And so I was exercising. That was the thing. So I said, okay, Patrick, so far you've managed to work up to your kind of 5-minute walk 4 times a day, from very low beginnings. Let's try and push ourselves to go further. So one day, shortly after my mum passed away, I said, right, I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk today. And I went for a 10-minute walk, and I got home and I had to lie down for 2 hours. I was exhausted. I was just like comatose in bed. This 10-minute walk had just hijacked me. But I thought, okay, we'll keep it up. And actually, to be fair, there's no doubt, and I've always made this clear, including in plenty of recent videos, that deconditioning plays a huge role in POTS. You need to get reconditioned, and when you are able, you do need to just push yourself a little bit more than you are able, and keep doing that, and build up, and one day you'll be able to do a lot. But so before too long, actually, I was walking 20 minutes a day, twice a day. So by kind of sort of end of April. So I built up and got to that point, and I was delighted with that. absolutely delighted because it was encouraging, and I felt a little bit more stable. It definitely helped. It definitely helped to do that. Okay. I had problems with Raynaud's, syndrome, where your hands are really cold, your feet are really cold. That was consistent for February and March. But as I forced myself to walk more, the circulation started to return to my feet. Okay, and I stopped getting the shooting pains I used to get in my feet. I used to, really just get this sort of nerve pain in my feet. So it was hard at first, but I forced myself to do it, and it did lead to a certain stabilization, and I was grateful for that. In line with this, but my heart rates were still high. They weren't budging from the plus 30 beats per minute. I just felt a bit better, and the overall heart rates were a bit lower. So I think before I started doing the exercise, that was when I was getting heart rates of 130, 140, and my supine heart rate might have been 80 or 90 or something like that. And then once I started to take the exercise, it was more common that my standing heart rate would be sort of 115, 110, but my sort of lying down heart rate would still be 80 or 85, so it was still going up plus 30, but the overall sort of picture was down. And that's something I firmly believe in, that if you are in a situation where you're noticing that your standing heart rate is up and you're doing the DNRS and so on, bear in mind that a considerable range of that is caused by deconditioning. There's no doubt about it. Absolutely no doubt about it. Okay, so it came down, but still met POTS criteria. And I started to, I went to I was recommended a cardiac rehabilitation person. A family member, a very kind family member who's also a medical professional, kind of stepped in the interim while I was waiting for this appointment with the POTS consultant, and read up on POTS for me, and kind of managed to ferry me around a little bit the Irish system, and he very kindly gave me a referral in this regard for a cardiac rehabilitation person in a kind of in a special physio centre. And I went along to her, and she was very kind, and she said she'd seen people with POTS, and that was a huge relief for me. And she talked about she hadn't heard of Levine, but she said that she tended to follow a recumbent sitting sort of exercise protocol initially, and she got me doing rowing and working on a recumbent bike, and taking part in an exercise class that she was organising as part of cardiac rehabilitation. I was the youngest there by about 45 years. They were old. They were getting on. These were people who had multiple heart attacks. They were old, and I remember sort of standing there and looking around at these people, and they were looking at me, and I was looking at them, and sort of wondering, why is he here? What's gone wrong with him? And really and truly, I felt a kind of real solidarity with these people, but I still felt I was a bit too young to be there, and they really were much older, they were an inspiring bunch because they'd been through a lot of things, as I say, multiple heart attacks, operations, all kinds of things, and now they were trying to do their 3 times a week of cardiovascular exercise, and I was joining in their class and doing my best. And the lovely person who was leading it, she was so supportive of me. She came to me and said, "I'm so proud of you, Patrick. Your blood pressure is staying stable. Well done. I'm really, really encouraged," and so on. And I was feeling better. And I'm a firm believer that exercise is a big part of the picture. Okay. So, so yes, I was doing all that. What else was I starting to do during this time? Well, I started to try to force myself to get my mind off the ideas of illness. This is a really important point, and it's something I talk about in a video which I call resuming nourishing activities during recovery. For me, should be a second pillar of the DNRS almost. I think the DNRS is the way out of POTS, but you also need, in every possible way, to stop thinking about illness. Okay, and you need, as you are able, to get back to normal activities. This in itself is a powerful rewiring factor. Okay, I really firmly believe that. It is a powerful rewiring factor. Absorb your attention in things unrelated to POTS. If that means unsubscribing from this channel or giving it a break for a while, do it. Honestly, it's nothing off my back. You need to allow yourself to read books that are normal, to watch programs that are normal, to engage in knitting if you like, or gardening, or listening to nice music. And actually, you don't have to go and read about norepinephrine reuptake transporter protein deficiency. It's something I very firmly believe. The idea is, once you have the confidence in what you're doing, or enough confidence, and you kind of understand intellectually why it's important to get your mind off symptoms of illness and so on, and resume nourishing activities and do the DNRS. Once you got that, you don't really need to read much more, about this nuance of the brain, that nuance of the brain, blah blah blah. You just need to do the practice. The recovery comes from doing, And although I hadn't started doing the DNRS yet, I was had started to notice that I was improving actually by forcing my mind onto other things. And so I was reading more, and I was practicing a lot of CBT. I had a CBT book. I write down a lot of negative thoughts and kind of challenge them, and I was stopping them at the root. And I was playing computer games. Great part of recovery, and anyone's life really. I should play them more often. So I was doing things like that, and those things helped. Okay, but I still had the continuous release of adrenaline. I still had the POTS, meeting the POTS criteria, but the release of adrenaline was less. The more I tried to engage in other things. Okay, so that's an important point I really want to offer to you. Okay, now what else can I say from this time? There were other things I wanted to say. What was it? I mean, yes, I ordered, so I ordered the DNRS in mid-April. It arrived towards the end of April, and I, in bed, I went through the program, the DVD program. I didn't start it properly until May the 11th, but I went through it all. I did the notes. I did the first initial exercises, and so I started doing it in a kind of basic way, and I have to say even that was helpful. Now, it doesn't fully kick in until you start doing it properly. But I started to notice that this was something different, and I was interested. Okay, my curiosity was piqued because I was very well familiar with a lot of this sort of stuff. I practicing mindfulness since I was, 18, on and off, but sometimes quite regularly, sometimes not so much. But I was, well aware of that. And I had been known about things like autogenics, how to progressive muscle relaxation since I was a child. And I, certainly was very familiar with CBT and had been for 2 or 3 years. And I was familiar with positive psychology. I was doing a thesis on Stoic philosophy, the ancient Greco-Roman philosophy as a way of life, which was a past life. And so I was steeped in a lot of things, steeped in them. But I was starting to sense that the DNRS was different, and I didn't think that there was something else, But this was different, and I started to pick that up early on. So I was hopeful that, kind of had a sense that if I do this for 6 months, it must make some difference. Like at least something's going to happen, right? So that was sort of where I was at with it. So I went through the DVDs and so on, and started doing the practice in a basic way. And that was kind of it for that while. Those months, they were more stable. I started to see some friends. I invited friends around, including my best friend, and he came round, and and I had this kind of routine, like everyone who came through the door had to be tested for POTS, and I did this kind of, as a way of sort of trying to make light of it all. I developed this persona as a Scottish doctor who was called Dr. Potty, and he would try and, diagnose people with POTS, and none of them had it, God, just the doctor himself. So my spirits were getting a bit better. Obviously I was grieving, there were times of intense grief, but I was starting to feel more stable. The exercise was helping. I was feeling proactive about it. My uncle, who's a consultant, had started to read up the papers about it, and he was kind of counselling me and giving me hopeful advice. So I was feeling in a better place with all of it, and which was great. And then on May the 2nd of 2015. My father and I went to England. Okay, so my father's renting a property there, a cottage, and we didn't fly because I didn't want to fly. I requested, I'm not going to fly. I said, right, not happening. And even though it's a very short flight, and so we drove over, and that journey unfortunately knocked me sideways again. And it was really unfortunate because I'd been making good progress, and suddenly, whereas I had been able suddenly to be able to do these 20-minute walks, I was kind of back down to the 5-minuters, and feeling quite sick and unwell after the day-long travel. So that was unfortunate, but I was now in this new place, potentially more conducive to recovery in the countryside, fresh air. Summer is about to start, and I suddenly had the worst allergies of my life in relation to hay fever. But I was in this new place, and as I got there, it was May the 2nd, or was it May the 7th, or was no, it was like May the 7th we left, because May the 2nd there was a special service for my mum, a month's mind they call it in Ireland, where you have a remembrance service a month after the passing. So that was on the 2nd of May, and that was very beautiful. And her funeral, of course, was sort of April 10th, I think. So, which was just for close friends and family. And I remember at that funeral, when we used to meditate together, my mum, who was a Roman Catholic. I'm not. I'm sort of atheistic, but open to everyone. I'm not a militant one at all, and I've often enjoyed spending time in a Benedictine Catholic abbey, where I would go for retreats. And I used to sing at the end of our meditation sessions to her. I used to sing the various Gregorian chants that they sing at the end of the Compline in Benedictine abbeys, and I got up and I sang that in the funeral, and I remember thinking to myself, how am I going to be able to do this? I remember thinking, walk with me, Mum, as I got up to sing, and I sang her favourite one, the Salve Regina, and I managed to do it, and this power came from somewhere within me that I was able to do that, and I did. And I remember afterwards one of my sisters said to me, if you can do that, you can do anything, and that stuck with me through as I started to move into recovery. So now in England, and have the DNRS with me, and in the next video I will discuss how it went when I finally started the program on May the 11th. I hope this video was helpful. It's kind of interim video. Thankfully it was a less intense period, apart from the intense grief, of course, but it was less nightmarish. My symptoms were starting to improve, and I was in a better overall position, even though, of course, that travel again to England kind of hijacked me, but not at all as badly as the flights from earlier in the year. So I hope this is helpful. Look forward to your comments as always, and thank you.